Hello, so we have explored how to put in a center front busk using a method of making buttonholes in our center front so that we can slide the latch portion of the busk into the center front. This method is best if you have a piece that needs to be stitched on, a facing. Generally, this is as a result of not having enough seam allowance, so we have to stitch on an additional piece to make enough to go around the busk. And so in order to do this, we are going to use a method in which we are going to stitch in the slits in which the busk can go into. So I have here my fabric piece and then a facing piece, and you can see that I have a stitch line of where my center front should be on both of these pieces, and this is about 1 inch longer than each. Just a general reminder to anyone that is putting in a busk that you cannot put a busk into a curved seam, so your seam does have to remain straight, and so you would have to adjust that if it is not straight. And then the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that I have this centered on my fabric, or if you have it so that it's going more towards the top or the bottom, that you have made those adjustments accordingly. Generally, I do put the latch system in first, and then I'm going to do the knob system second, so that my knobs line up specifically where my latch has gone into the fabric. So I'm going to set aside my knob piece for the moment, and we are just going to mark where the notches need to be for the latch portion of this. And so using my ruler, I want to make sure that I am centering this on here. So I also am going to make sure that, if we remember from our previous video, that the side that the latches are attached onto, that is actually your exterior. So I'm going to flip this over and put that face down so it sits like it should. And I'm just going to double check and make sure that I have this centered on here. It can come up just a little bit. All right. And now I am going to mark where I want these to lay. So just like we did with the buttonholes, I'm marking the top and the bottom of each one of the latches. And so you can see here that I now have where these want to slide in. Now I don't want to give this too much flexibility because I don't want the busk to be loose inside here. So I am going to come in here and stitch these on the top and the bottom, back stitching well at the beginning and end of each one of these sections, making sure that it is not going to come loose. So my next portion that I'm going to do is lining these two up and pinning these so that they are line to line. As we usually do, you should have your stitch line marked on both sides. And I am going to pin those. And I'm just going to use the marks that I just made as my guideline for when I go to sew this. So once I have this lined up and pinned, we are going to go to the machine and stitch these together. So I shall be back. Alright, so now this has been stitched, so you can see that this is the facing side. This is the side that is marked with the slits for the busk. And so I basically have left it open so that there's an opening in each one of these spots. And so before we go any further, we do need to press this open and over. So using my sleeve board, my favorite way to press my seams open, just lifts it up a little bit more so it's closer to me. I am going to press this first open, and then I'm going to press this over flat. And I want it to be pressed directly on that seam so my busk sits exactly on the center front. and I'm not adding any additional or missing anything. So we can see now, as we have pressed this open, that we are going to slide this in. Remember which direction is your exterior, and you can see I've just been able to slide this straight in. And if we look closely, you can see where there was just a little slit, but there's not any wiggle room here. This is very tight. And so my next goal would be to come in here and sew right on the other side of this bone that the latches are attached to, anchoring this in. And then you can finish the tops and the bottoms, and then move on to the other side of your busk. Have fun sewing! So I wanted to show you one way. There are many different ways that you could finish this off, but probably the most common way is to just stitch the busk in. And so what I have done here is that I have trimmed my seam allowance for both my outside and my facing side down to 1/2 inch. I am going to slide my busk in between these two layers. If you have less than 1/2 inch, that is fine too. Oftentimes we're using this method because we don't have any seam allowance. And then I trimmed my facing down to 1 inch. So now all I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap this over, and I want that to stay consistent and even and pretty tight, but we have to remember that we are going to be stitching this in. So I need a little bit of a lip in order to stitch that. And so it's probably going to be around 3/8 of a seam allowance, because I want to go a little bit past where my seam allowance is, ending from where I stitched that. And so using my iron, I'm going to press that down so it's nice and even and straight. The lovely thing about coutil is it also has the little herringbone lines, which are helpful. Remember to make sure you're putting the exterior on the right side of the fabric. And then I'm going to wrap that in, keeping my busk really tight. And then coming in here, this is always a little bit tricky, but pinning this into place as best as you can, because the busk is going to be unforgiving. And then you can go to your machine and you can top stitch that down. So I was able to now machine stitch this on, and I use just a regular stitch, back stitching at the beginning and the end. And I use a regular foot. I find a zipper foot you can't quite get so close without it falling off. So I used a regular foot, just went very slowly, and I did make sure that I was going very close to this bone so that this doesn't shift around any direction, as that is going to be nice and tight for our corseting needs. So have fun, and if you have any questions, let me know.